A new warning tonight about the scope of a massive cyber attack.
Already believed to be the largest cyber attack on our government.
America under virtual invasion. That's what Senator Dick Durbin is calling a massive Russian cyber attack on U.S. government agencies.
A so-called supply chain attack against SolarWinds, a company that specialized in network tools, gave hackers access to potentially thousands of targets.
The SolarWinds hack was, and really continues to be one of the biggest espionage campaigns recently discovered.
The truth is this. The Trump administration failed to prioritize cybersecurity.
Microsoft, Google, and other U.S. government entities were compromised by the intrusion. Hackers were able to compromise the Department of Justice and the Nuclear Weapons Agency, among others.
Advanced attacker, we believe to be the Russians. All evidence points to one intelligence service or another in Russia, although there's some debate about exactly which one. Compromised SolarWinds.
The hack so far seems limited to unclassified systems, but the scope of it is massive. Around 18,000 customers were exposed to the malicious code.
What happened is that the hack infiltrated their build process, which pushes out updates to all of their customers.
How were hackers able to compromise so many key U.S. companies and governmental agencies, and how can the U.S. prevent this from happening again? The SolarWinds hack was what is known as a supply chain attack.
What's unique about this, or special about this particular intrusion, is that they used the access that they got by compromising SolarWinds itself to insert malware into the build process. This then allowed them to target SolarWinds customers that deployed this backdoored update.
They pushed this update out, which allowed them to essentially put malicious code on any customer of SolarWinds that had the Orion platform in place, and then have access to their infrastructure. Some of the companies that were involved: Microsoft, Cisco, Intel, a lot of Department of Defense type organizations, federal government installations, big companies that were impacted by this.
These updates were signed off on by the original vendor, and there was no reason to suspect that they were compromised or a threat to other systems. And the intrusion was uncovered by the cybersecurity company FireEye. The reaction to the hack by members of the US government when it was revealed to the public was stark.
When Moonlight Maze, a quite comparable Russian intrusion set or campaign, was discovered in the late 1990s, the same thing happened. People called it cyber war, an attack against the United States, but the same thing was true then that is true today, namely that we're looking at most likely a sophisticated form of intelligence collection, of espionage, not at an attack.
FireEye, the cybersecurity company that discovered the hack, only found out because it too was a victim of the SolarWinds intrusion.
It was kind of by happenstance or mistake. And so what had happened is FireEye leverages something called multi-factor authentication or two-factor authentication. And one of the users inside of FireEye got a request to reset their multi-factor authentication, which they had not done. And so really good. This is where education awareness and employee awareness really comes into play here. Without that, FireEye may have not discovered this breach in the first place, and the attackers may still have access to all of these systems. We would never know about it.
They suspect the breach went undetected for something like 8 months.
U.S. security officials are just beginning to discover how widespread the intrusion is, acknowledging that it targeted at least the Treasury, Commerce, State, and Homeland Security departments and may have hit the Pentagon.
What the retaliation is going to be, and I think it ought to be whatever we assess the cost we have incurred to be, plus.
So firms like FireEye and Symantec, right, they are in the job of defense. And to defend in this world, which is very much kind of based on open source information sharing and communities of practice, you need to be able to get that information out there as soon as possible. So I think FireEye absolutely did the right thing, because many of not only their customers, but civilian firms and civil society around the world were exposed to this threat.
Definitely were some failings in that security around the build process. We don't like to victim blame during these kind of things, but we do look for evidence of other security best practices not being followed that we can see externally.
Knowing who was behind the hack is necessary for the US government to react appropriately to the action. Initially, the US government said that the attack was likely attributed to Russia.
Attribution has happened in this space also for about 20 years. So we have a rich universe of case studies and details on how to do attribution and how to do it well. We also know that the US government and US intelligence community has some of the most formidable attribution capabilities of any intelligence agency. So they would be able to look at forensic details at, for example, infrastructure, as it's called in the jargon, that is computers that were used by a certain adversary to breach the target. But really, sometimes they would even have, the US government would even have intercepts of adversaries talking about an operation, by text or by phone, or even in some cases in person. So that, of course, makes attribution possible at a very high confidence level. But really important to note here is we have dozens, more than 3 dozen cases of high quality, detailed attribution done by the US government.
One big question is, how do you deter a country like Russia or North Korea from pursuing a hack like SolarWinds?
And we've seen decades of cyber attacks without any meaningful US government response. That's improving. But so in that sense, people are right. Deterrence does not work to stop cyber intelligence activity. However, deterrence actually shapes the way that intelligence and cyber operations are conducted. If you are a nation state looking at trying to do something to the United States, you can decide to use your military forces, or you can decide to do a cyber intrusion. Well, you're not going to attack the United States because the United States military is probably going to impose tremendous punishment. So instead, you start looking at cyber tools. That doesn't mean that cyber tools are particularly effective. It may be the only thing you have left. It may be the second best option.
The repercussions of the SolarWinds hack are still being unraveled. As the Biden administration settles in, it will have to contend with the aftermath of this hack and also work to prevent security lapses that can endanger national security in the future.
We reserve the right to respond at a time and a manner of our choosing to any cyber attack.
A SolarWinds spokesperson noted, quote, "We are solely focused on helping the industry and our customers understand and mitigate this attack and have taken a number of steps to further secure our network and products."
There needs to be laws in place and direct ramifications regardless of who's in office. To say, listen, if there's a cyber attack that's targeting our private sector, ransomware, etc., and it's originating from a specific country, that country is going to be held liable from a sanctions perspective, potentially kinetic, warfare. Who knows? Whatever that ends up being, holding these countries accountable for ramifications really needs to be the wave of the future, and it's not something that we're discussing yet, which is unfortunate.
President-elect Biden called this a cyber assault, and Senator Dick Durbin talked about it as a virtual declaration of war. I think that this kind of rhetoric is not helpful. This kind of rhetoric talks about this as if this was some kind of military assault. Senator Mitt Romney even talked about this as being the equivalent of Russian bombers flying over the United States. And I don't think that's accurate at all. This is the equivalent of the Russians or the Americans or the Chinese or the British doing what great powers have been doing for hundreds of years, which is recruiting sources in their rivals and in their allies sometimes to try and better understand what's going on.
So how can you deter clandestine intelligence collection? And the answer is, well, if you expose it, certainly you raise the cost for the adversary, but they won't stop doing it. They will only try to be a little more disciplined and maybe have better operational security next time around. So this is really about raising the costs and making life and work a little harder for advanced adversaries, not about deterrence, really. Meaning, not about stopping this altogether.